In this exercise, I'm going to show you how to take those two objects, at least our perceived objects, the green one and the orange one, and we'll fill them in with gradients, as we're seeing in this final celticknot.ai file. It's not really hard to pull this off, it's just that it takes a fairly deliberate approach, because things can go wrong, as I'll show you, so you just have to be careful. I've gone ahead and restored the saved version of my intricateweave.ai file. And so let's say I decide to select a green object. We've seen that you can do that using the wide arrow tool. So I'll go ahead and grab my wide arrow tool, and then I'll alt drag or option drag around the top of that object to select it independently of the orange circular object. And then I'll go up here to the fill swatch in the control panel, and I'll change that fill to green grad, which is one of the swatches I've set up in advanced. And I get this effect here, which is okay. I guess that's more or less sort of what I'm looking for. At least it's a starting point. I did fill in these regions as well, the parts of the circle that are not selected with the green gradient, and up here as well. So everything that's caught inside of these objects got filled, which isn't what I want. But anyway, I'll alt drag or option drag now around a portion of this orange shape in order to select what I perceive to be a circle with a hole cut out of it. And then I'll go up to the fill option, and I'll change that to orange grad, another swatch that I've set up in advance. And that absolutely kills the stuff on the inside. So that wipes out everything. And truth be told, this is the wrong approach. So let me show you the right approach, because you could be at this for a little while trying to get all these guys roughed in properly. And you could end up, if you go too far with it, you can end up losing your strokes. And that's a big pain in the neck if you have to reestablish those. So I'm going to press Control-Z or Command-Z on a Mac a couple of times in order to undo those modifications. And we're going to switch here from the Live Paint Bucket tool to the Live Paint Selection tool, which you can get by pressing Shift-L, of course. Now, problem is I need to select my fills, but I can't, because you may recall a few exercises ago I set this tool so it only selects strokes, so I need to double-click on it in order to bring up the Live Paint Selection Options dialog box, and I need to turn on Select Fills. So both of these checkboxes are on. I'll click OK. And now I'll just click someplace inside of the green object in order to select that green. Now you might figure, okay, now I've got to shift click and so on. And actually not. Here's what you can do. With one of these green areas selected, you can go up to the select menu, choose same, and choose fill color. That actually works. And that'll go ahead and select the rest of the green fills. So a huge time saver. And now, just so I can see what I'm doing, I'll press Control-H, Command-H on the Mac to hide those selection regions, and I will switch my fill here in the swatches panel, and that works great. Now, you might look at it and say, no, it doesn't. We have all these horrible intersections going on, and basically that's what Illustrator's done. It's filled each and every one of these subpaths with its own independent gradient. That's okay. We can fix that later, so don't worry about it. What I'm going to do now, as long as I'm here, is I'm going to go to the gradient panel. So go ahead and open it up if you want to work along with me. And I'm going to change the type. I save these gradients as linear gradients. I want them to be radial. So right now, at this point, so that I don't have to go back and mess around with things, I'm going to change the type from linear to radial. And then I'll get these tiny little spotlights of gradients throughout all these little subpaths. Now, we will override that shortly, but right now I think it's pretty cool. Now I'm going to click inside one of the oranges. We're not going to see the selection pattern this time because I pressed Control-H or Command-H to hide them. That's fine. I know it's selected. I'm going to go up to the select menu. I'm going to choose same, and I'm going to choose fill color again. That selects all of the oranges, and I can confirm that by pressing Control-H, Command-H on the Mac. That brings back my little weird selection patterns. Fair enough. Press Control-H or Command-H again to get rid of them. Now go over to the swatches panel and click on orange grad, and we get a bunch of little orange gradients all over the place. And here inside the gradient panel, I'll change type from linear to radial in order to create this effect here. Now you might be thinking, what in the world do we do now? How do we solve this particular problem? Well, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. If you're working along with me once again, I want you to select all of the objects in this illustration by pressing Control-A or Command-A on the Mac. This would be all the visible objects. And I'll press Control-H, Command-H on the Mac so I can see that everything's selected. I just wanted to make sure this outer rectangle is also selected. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And now, check this out. Using the gradient tool, you can go ahead and drag inside of the illustration in order to set the angle and size and all that jazz associated with your radial gradient. So get the gradient tool or press the G key if you want to. And I'm going to start my gradient from about here, and I'm going to drag down to the lower right region of my window. and I'm going to release. And that goes ahead and fills everybody with this same sort of radial gradient, and it's continuous throughout the various shapes. Problem is, it's looking like I just wiped out my strokes, which would be terrible news. In fact, what Illustrator has done, it's just changed all my strokes. So it still knows where the right strokes are, didn't completely wipe them out, which makes them fairly easy to reinstate, but it did for some reason override them, and I don't know why it did that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and change the placement of my radial gradient a little bit. I think I'll start it right about there and drag down like so. So you can apply the gradient tool to multiple path outlines, even if they're part of live paint objects here inside of Illustrator, which is really great. All right, anyway, I'm going to switch back to my black arrow tool, and I'll click off my paths for a moment to deselect them, and then I'm going to marquee around these shapes so that I'm selecting them independently of the background rectangle. So the square is not selected this time around. And I'll go ahead and reinstate my stroke information. I'll press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac so you can see that all of the strokes are in the right place. It's just that we now have weak blacks, I believe, and we also have 1-point strokes, which is no good. So I'll click on the stroke swatch here in the control panel, and I'll select Rich Black, and that will darken up the blacks. And then I'll click inside of this line weight value right there, and I'll enter 2 and press the Return key or the Enter key on the Mac to reinstate those strokes. All right, one more thing. I want to add a little bit of depth, as I was saying, and you could try to heap another stroke on this object here inside the Appearance panel if you want to. I don't recommend you go that route. I didn't find it to be that successful myself. Instead, the best approach I found was to go to the Effect menu, choose Stylize, and then choose Drop Shadow. Or you can press my keyboard shortcut if you loaded D keys, Control-Alt-E, Command-Option-E on a Mac. And these are the settings that I applied. So mode set to multiply, the color is black, by the way. Opacity 50%, X and Y offset both 1 point, blur 0. Turn on a preview checkbox and you'll see what happens. So it's just a slight amount of depth there. Click OK. So to just give you a sense of what happened, because it's pretty subtle actually, I'll turn off that eyeball here inside the Appearance panel, the one that's associated with Drop Shadow. Turn it off. That's what the shapes look like without the Drop Shadow. This is what they look like with the Drop Shadow. So just a little bit of depth going on. And that is the final version of my illustration. So once again, if you decide to do this number where you click off the paths, I'll press Control-H, Command-H on the Mac so I can see what I'm doing. Click off the paths to deselect them, and then start dragging these items to different locations like so, and then you start to reveal these little bits of weirdness, that is the ghosting associated with the original gradient pattern. Then all you need to do is select the shape once again and then apply the gradient tool in order to rectify the situation. And that's entirely up to you. But this gives you a sense of the amazing power, really, of this basic feature. The whole reason that Adobe created the Live Paint feature in the first place was to simplify things. And what they ended up doing was creating a feature that does something you can't otherwise do inside of Illustrator: create overlapping path outlines, paths that weave in and out of each other and in and out of themselves.